Greetings and welcome to Lizard Creations. Today I'm going to show you how I made this simple little sign with a sandblaster. The first step is to square up the board. I found an old piece of board that's been sitting in my shop for probably 40 years, so I decided to use that as the base for my sign. Here I'm cutting the edges of the board to bring the two sides parallel. To square up the ends, I'm using my miter's saw. I decided to put a 45-degree bevel on the corners of the board, so that's what I'm doing here. Notice that I've set up a little jig so that I can have consistent cuts on all four corners. This old board has been drying for at least 40 years and it's warped quite a bit, so I'm going to flatten the surfaces using my thickness planer. The next step is to sand the board. Note the cracks in the board. I'm not too concerned about them because I will be filling those with epoxy resin. I've finished the sanding, and what I've done is painted the face of the tile black. That way when I do the sand carving, the areas that will remain will be the black areas of the text, and the rest of the wood and the black paint will be blasted away so it displays only the natural wood around the actual black text. Now the step that I have to do next is the artwork, which I've already completed. It says mailbox, deliveries and back with an arrow. Very simple sign. From this point, I will send it off to my plotter cutter and it will cut the actual masking material so that I can then apply that mask onto the face of this wood, and then I can go and do the sandblasting. Here my plotter cutter is cutting through the rubber masking material. It doesn't cut all the way through, it only cuts up to the carrier that the masking material rides on, and that way you can remove the masking material from the carrier later. This is what the mask looks like after it comes off the plotter cutter. Before I apply the mask, I will find the center line on the actual board and the center line of the mask so that I can line them up when I put the mask onto the board. What I'll do next is align the center line of the mask with the center line on the board. I will also ensure that the characters are centered equal distance from each end of the board. From there, I will stick down the one end of the mask, and then I'll start to pull the carrier out from underneath and stick the mask down on the rest of the board. Once I've adhered the mask to the board, I'll start to remove the mask in the areas where I intend to sandblast. I leave the characters on the board so they're protected from the sandblasting. Once I've removed the bulk of the mask, I'll use an X-Acto knife to remove the centers of some of the characters, such as a D or an O or an A. Once I've removed all the unwanted areas on the mask, I'll then use a brayer to push down on the mask to ensure good adhesion with the board. Something I've added is tape around the outer edge, just a little bit down from the top surface. That way when I blast, I won't blast away all the black paint that's around the outer edge, and it'll add a nice highlight. It's time to put the sign in the sandblast cabinet. I'll continue to sandblast until I've brought out the grain in the wood. Early wood and late wood have different hardnesses, so they'll blast differently. One will blast deeper than the other. Now that the sandblasting is complete, I can remove the mask. Notice how the sandblasting has affected the grain of the wood. The early wood and the late wood have different hardnesses, so the sandblasting affects the grain differently in those areas. Just so you can see how much detail you can get with the plotter, look at the little space between the arm of the R and the vertical of the R. Now if I slide this over, you can see the same with the B and with the N. The next step is to mix up some epoxy resin. I use epoxy resin on almost everything I create because it seals the wood and protects it from the environment. My first coat is a seal coat. I put it on relatively thick so that it'll soak into the wood. Once it's cured after 24 hours, I'll sand it lightly and put a second coat on. And finally, I will do the same thing for a third time. I'll sand it lightly after it's cured for 24 hours and put a third coat on. After the first coat is dried, what I'll do is put tape on the back and then pour resin into those cracks to seal them permanently. For each coat of resin, I'll pop the bubbles with a blowtorch to get a nice clear finish. And here's the finished sign. I mounted it on the gate to our front steps so that people will see it before they try to deliver something to our front door. I created this sign for two reasons. The first is our mailbox is behind the cedar tree to the right. That tree was much smaller when we first planted it, and it's now blocking the view of our mailbox. The second is the box on the side of the house is the chimney to our fireplace. And over the years, we've found people would actually try and stuff envelopes into that chimney. We've completely enclosed it now with diamond lath, but I'm hoping this sign will also prevent them from trying to use it for a mailbox. It's now time to showcase two of my wife's paintings. The first is Cactus Rose. It's a 12 by 16 watercolor in a 19 by 23 inch rustic colored barnboard frame. The second is Camouflage. It's a mixed media on a 16 by 20 inch canvas, and it has a black wooden frame. You can see more of my wife's paintings at lizartcreations.com. And remember, have fun, be safe, and create a remarkable treasure.